So my most viewed video so far is actually my analysis on the Pharah rework, and I'm kind of happy. It was one of my better videos, and it was kind of a turning point for me as a person, so I'm actually really proud to call it one of my most popular videos, and right now my most popular video. But have all of the reworks been so good? The short answer is no, none of them have been as good as the Pharah rework, even though Pharah is a little overtuned right now, I think. But a few of them have been quite solid in their own right. Now I have about 7 characters I want to talk about, and this is going to cover every rework. The 7 characters are going to be characters that got a rework entering Overwatch 2 or since Overwatch 2's release, with a lenient inclusion of Zenyatta because I wanted to include some support. This isn't a Time Monster video if I don't get to complain about support a little bit, but still. I have 7 characters, 3 tanks, 3 DPS, and Zenyatta found his way in here somehow. Before I get into anything, yes, I'm recording this in another day, is how am I going to be judging these reworks? Well, in my opinion, an Overwatch rework should succeed on at least 3 fronts. First off, it should be warranted. This character should be struggling in one way or another, whether it be balance or design or keeping up with power creep in terms of ideas, really. And if the character isn't struggling in one of those facets, then I don't think they need a rework. Another thing I'm taking into account is how fun it is pre-rework and post-rework to play as and against. For example, if a character has a really fun ability that is not terrible to play against or play with, for example, let's just say Reinhardt's Fire Strike. It's a long-range projectile that feels really satisfying if you land a predicted or really good flick or something like that. And if you're playing against it, you have to kind of respect that. It's not cheesy, it's not corny, it's nothing like that. But if they reworked Rein and remove Fire Strike, that's a lot of the fun of the character just being taken away, and for no real reason. Finally, I'm judging these reworks based on, is the character better designed for the game? Is it healthy? Is it engaging? Is it something that should be good? There's an obvious character I'll get to later that fails this aspect wholeheartedly, and realistically this is the most important one. Is it healthy for the meta? Does it warp the meta in an unhealthy way whenever it is even close to viable? I think that is the most important factor. Starting off with the one that I've already given my opinion on, Pharah's rework is incredible. It completely changed the way you play the character. It made her way more fun, it made her way more viable, and it made her just feel more responsive to play. Having that extra mobility cooldown has made her a stronger flanker at high level play, whilst also being less reliant on running away from the enemy team and being too far to be hit for lower level players. It's a win-win on that front for Pharah. And they didn't really need to change much else. In reality, her primary fire and ult are exactly the same. Her E is almost exactly the same. It just now has a combo. And then her shift is, for the most part, the same. They just kind of added a new ability, changed her passive, and changed her shift a little bit. It's fantastic. It really shows how less is more sometimes. Do know that sometimes. I'll be getting to him shortly. Now, Pharah has been tearing things up a little bit too well nowadays, so I do think that there are some nerfs in order. So what would I nerf about the character? Well, I think her ult might need a little bit of touching up. As crazy as it sounds, her increased mobility nowadays means she doesn't just kind of fall into position. She can actually use her cooldowns to get into good positions, as well as her movement speed increase on her passive to hit a position where she can solo barrage someone very safely and then cover herself from enemies approaching her. Honestly, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think barrage needs a bit of a nerf. Now, how would I nerf it? I think just reducing the number of rockets per second is probably for the best. This ult right now is just kind of used as a screw the tank player button, so I think honestly cutting the rockets per second down by like 33% could be fair, because it is still the highest DPS ultimate in the game after all these years. All in all though, despite the fact that there are clear balance problems with Pharah right now, I think that she's still probably one of, if not the best reworks the game has ever had. The next character to talk about, this is going to be the only character that I will be talking about today that actually switched roles and that is Doomfist. Now, I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm kind of a Doomfist aficionado. Overwatch 1 Doom, genuinely one of my favorite characters in any video game ever. The skill expression, the thrill, the power you feel playing Overwatch 1 Doom is incredible, and he's so much harder than people really gave him credit for. I'll admit, punch botting with a competent Zarya or something on your team was not difficult, but to hit the combos and to hit the diags and to hit everything was so exhilarating, and that's what I loved about Doomfist. It was the movement tech. And surprisingly enough, despite the fact that he was put into an entire new role with one of those cooldowns no longer existing, he is, probably all in all, way better for the game. The removal of the one-shot in particular has made Doomfist in Overwatch 2 feel much more fair to play against. For trade-off, they did give him an AoE on his punch and a new form of rocket punch, which just is huge, does more damage, and you need to hit a certain threshold to get it. Specifically, blocking a certain amount of damage in power block, as well as ulting can get you that empowered punch. His seismic slam was changed from a short leap or a targeted dash into just Winston jump, programmed by monkeys. I'm not even kidding. If you look at Doomfist slam versus Winston slam, and look at how they interact with slopes, these were kind of programmed by different people entirely, and I think that the people who programmed Winston Lee probably did it better. But the Doomfist slam feels more fun and more skill expressive, so I'll give it to them. Meteor Strike was not changed significantly into Overwatch 2, and honestly, over time, it's probably been reworked more than some other characters entirely. I'll get to him later. Specifically adding the healing, changing the damage numbers, adding the slow, changing the slow, giving him empowered punch. It is so much different than its Overwatch 1 counterpart, and that's a good thing, because the Overwatch 1 counterpart was a kill tool. This is a sustain and survivability tool. This is a second life and one of the best tank ultimates in the game, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. Overall, I do think the Doomfist rework is fantastic, but the overall value it brings to the game and the overall effect it's had is somewhat diminished just because of how much lower it was to begin with. But still, Doomfist does not really need a bounce patch right now, and if anything, maybe a slight buff could help where he's at. Nothing major, of course, but I mean, 25 health I don't think would be too much. Next I'm gonna talk about Orisa. Yeah. Orisa going into Overwatch 2 was changed almost entirely. Her primary fire no longer relies on ammo, but now has a heat mechanic, which is way more interesting than just a standard ammo mechanic, because it's something that no other character really has. Hanzo doesn't have traditional ammo, Brig and Reinhardt have melee swings, but outside of that, and I guess D.Va, but outside of those 4 examples...
Do I amuse you? Am I some sort of clown to you?
I hate my job.
All of the characters in the game just reloaded. Then Doomfist didn't have a traditional reload, which made him way more interesting. And now Orisa as well does not have a traditional reload. The overheating mechanic makes her way more interesting than she ever was in Overwatch 1 by default, and that's besides the point that Javelin Spin is a way more engaging cooldown for you than her old barrier ever was. Her old shield was a drop and forgot kind of cooldown. You put it down, you sat there, you didn't press E again until it was gone. You would sometimes press Fortify if it was broken early, but for the most part, you would sit behind your shield and hold M1 at the bad guys. And then if you didn't see any bad guys, you press right click to put the bad guys in your screen. And then if you have your ultimate, you'd press Q to shoot bad guys better. Overwatch 1 Orisa was terrible. But now Orisa's kit is way more engaging. She went from, I will protect you by sitting here and doing nothing, to the horse from hell, the battle cattle, a fucking terrorist in Overwatch, the most terrifying character of all games. She's the fucking Terminator. They actually just made her the fucking Terminator.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
And as much as people despise Orisa metas, even in Overwatch 2, it's way better than Overwatch 1 Orisa. I hate to say it. I've given it some thought, and while I used to say Overwatch 1 Orisa would be better in Overwatch 2, I just think Overwatch 2's Orisa is just objectively better. She's annoying and boring, but I don't really think there's anything you can do about that except for tuning the damage fall off a little bit. Her Fortify, it still slows you nowadays, but you can cancel it now, which you couldn't in Overwatch 1, which at least adds something. And then her Pull, which was her most interesting cooldown, was replaced with a Javelin Spear, which is still quite interesting, and it's still very fun to land, probably even more so than her old Pull. Now, Terra Surge could be a more interesting ultimate. It feels like the Overwatch developers looked at Grav, looked at Halt, looked at Flux, and decided to put them all in one really mediocre package. But honestly, as boring and just tar as Orisa metas are, I'd give her a B tier. She's kind of fine. I think in terms of her rework, they fixed a lot of the problems and made her much more engaging. Just put damage fall off back on this character, please. I think that was more of a problem than her sustain. And hey, at the end of the day, we can just say that Orisa counters. Okay, fine, I'll talk about fucking Roadhog. Roadhog is boring. Roadhog is not fun. For a while, I thought that Roadhog players maybe enjoyed Roadhog, but just nobody else in the lobby did, so 1 out of 10 players were having fun. But no, Roadhog is not even fucking fun. This character is so boring, and old Roadhog was honestly more fun, because at least you had the one-shot, and at least you had the right-click, which was kind of interesting. You could one-shot people from mid-range if you were really, really precise. It was a skill-testing ability, and I kind of miss it. I think it's honestly a better designed primary fire than Roadhog's current primary fire. But in terms of actually analyzing the rework, Roadhog's primary fire got worse after the rework. They tried to merge both into one, and it's just not fun. His Take a Breather was significantly improved in terms of game design and interest in using. Rather than being an 8-second invincibility button, it is now 3 seconds of semi-invincibility in the fact that it is a my health bar will not move button. And then recently they nerfed the unhealthy part of it, which was that it would provide too much damage resist. Then his hook is exactly the same, and his ult is exactly the same. I honestly forgot about Pigpen until I looked at the wiki to check if I was forgetting anything. Wow, this Roadhog character makes me fall asleep.
Hey, you. Finally awake.
The only interesting part about current Roadhog that I found, the only part that made me get a single semblance of happiness, was hooking Mercies out of Guardian Angel. After prowling Mercies for years and not having them move an inch when they're in Guardian Angel, this just felt like justice. I really cannot overstate how much of a failure the Roadhog rework is. They had the opportunity to make him way more interesting, and I'm gonna be honest, this is going to sound crazy. Paladins did it better. If they just put old Roadhog secondary fire in the primary fire slot, and then gave him Pigpen with a bigger radius but less damage, I honestly think Roadhog would be way better. That way then Pigpen would be a more frontline tool like they said it was. Roadhog would be way more fun to play because that old right click was actually really fun to use, whereas his current primary fire is putting me to sleep. His ultimate is kind of fine with where it is. Maybe have it a little bit more knockback and a little bit less damage. I don't care. And then the vape changes were great. It's just that Roadhog feels so fucking boring to play with or against because he's just a tank buster. A bad tank buster who everybody wants to kill because nobody likes him. And so naturally the way to fix this is just put his old secondary fire as his new primary fire. He's not going to blow people up at close range just like the turtle from Paladins, where he has the hook, except he doesn't get a kill from it, he just gets to support his team with it. And at the end of the day, my ass is not playing Paladins to get footage for this video. Now that I've gone from an extreme low, I get to go to an extreme high in terms of characters that I actually like. And looky here! It's one of my favorite reworks that they have completely failed from a balancing perspective. Also, just a quick forewarning for this game. For some reason, everyone was depressed and shit, so the chat's gonna be a bit weird, but that's aside the point. Oh, Bastion. Oh, Bastion. Why couldn't they just implement the Mirror Watch changes as his new kit? Honestly, that's the best rework of Bastion we've ever gotten. Turret form is just inherently problematic, and unless you want to narrow the spread so much and reduce the damage so much that it's basically an entirely different cooldown, that is the best solution. Having him be a mobile sonic arrow is genuinely a really interesting idea. It makes him way more supportive. And the shotgun spread, the really tight shotgun spread that he had during that event, made him way more fun to play than any other iteration of the character has ever been. At close to mid ranges, you were like 3 or 4 tapping people. It was doing insane amounts of damage. Meanwhile, at farther ranges, it was still doing adequate enough damage to be a pestering tool for something like a Widowmaker off in the distance. Meanwhile, the current one, it does do a respectable amount of damage. It's just not quite as fun as that version. And turret form is an extremely unhealthy ability because it is just a shoot the tank button, and those are always fucking boring. The current Bastion ult is probably one of the worst ultimates in the game in terms of a balanced design, and it is probably the most worsened ultimate and his ult is the worst version of any reworked part of any character's kit. It is just so much less interesting, so much less fun, and so much less good than Overwatch 1 Bastion's ult. At least the other characters that got reworked have a more engaging ultimate. This is just, alright, you're not playing the game for a few seconds, make 3 circles, we might give you a kill. It's just not fun. Either bring back tank form, or honestly, add back the splicers. Those were really fun, even if you only add 1 splicer. Do something lore-wise to mirror Torbjorn, where maybe you give him a little walking turret. I don't know. There's interesting things you can do with Bastion. Don't just remove the turret, remove the ult, and honestly, bring back the Mirror Watch iteration with Overwatch 1 ult. That would probably be the best case scenario for this character. Now for Cass, I kind of have 2 different versions of the character to talk about, and those 2 versions, one is way worse than the other. I'm going to go through his sort of progression to what he is today over the respective time frame, and heading into Overwatch 2, there was an immediate problem because his old magnetic grenade, remember it doing 130 damage? An auto-target ability that dealt 130 damage, where the average health in the game was 200, and he had the ability to do 70 damage with 1 bullet. Can you imagine why this was problematic? Can you imagine why I really hated this cooldown, and why I already was saying I think they should bring back Flashbang? Well, at this point in time, they also gave him damage resistance on his roll. His ultimate also had a damage resistance, but for the most part, he was unchanged from his Overwatch 1 state. Then a few patches later, he gained his Hinder Nade, the most iconic and unfun thing Cassidy maybe has ever had. I would rather have Flashbang than Hinder Nade in a heartbeat, because this was like 1.5 to 2 seconds of, hey Doomfist, you can't play the game. Hey Tracer, you can't play the game. And also half your health is gone. It was a fantastic damage tool, it was a fantastic CC tool, and it was way stronger than Flashbang ever was. And for certain characters, far more annoying. Maybe if you like to play Orisa all day, or Roadhog, or Mauga, then this would be better to deal with. But for somebody like me who likes characters that move quick, this was my personal hell. And that's where we bring it to today, where Cass is arguably in his best state he's been in maybe ever. They brought down Fan the Hammer's damage. Thank God, I was begging for that for a long time. They changed his fall-off range a while back, which I think maybe needs a reversion. But the most important thing is they brought back Flashbang in a much more interesting way. It's now a slow, probably 50% is too strong by the way, but that's besides the point. As well as the hindering aspect the old Hinder Nade had. However, because it's not hunting you down like a rabid dog searching for the last piece of sausage in his dead owner's countertop, it's just hit it or don't. It's definitely more skillful than old Hinder Nade used to be, and is honestly way more fun to use because it's not just throwing it out there in the middle of nothing. You can actually save it and use it on somebody who's doing certain stupid shit, like a Tracer, or a Genji, or a Doom, or a Ryan, or a Queen, or anything. You can actually use it in an interesting way other than just, hey, I'm just gonna throw this out in neutral. I hate to say it, but this is the best design any version of Cassidy's E's has ever had. But drop it. Slow down a little bit, please. Additionally, his ult is way better. The damage resistance now fades over time, but he also moves quicker over the course of casting the ultimate. So now, rather than just waddling away, waddle, you can actually kind of catch up to people, especially if you have a Lucio and they don't. The amount of jump scares I've been seeing in EWC thanks to this one buff is genuinely hilarious. So all in all, I think either nerf the fall off or nerf the hinder slow. But outside of that, the most recent version of Cass is honestly the best and one of the best reworks Overwatch has ever had. I'm going to go over Sombra next. And again, just like Cass, there's kind of multiple different eras of Sombra, except where Cass, it was sort of a gradual line. Sombra, it's bumps in the road. Heading into Overwatch 2, they added to her passive that she would deal 40% more damage to hack targets. This would later be nerfed down to 25%. They also made it so that EMP and hack only had about a second of ability lockout, which was way more fun to deal with. Although the fact that she would just kind of hack, shoot, kill you was not exactly ideal. It's a drastic improvement on the Overwatch 1 design where she could literally have you unable to act with anything other than your primary fire for 16 seconds if she wanted to. And if you're a character like Reinhardt or Doomfist where you are exceedingly reliant on your cooldowns, this character was hell. And honestly, Sombra was just a matchup fish, where she would do amazing into characters like Doomfist, Reinhardt, and Lucio, but then she would do so much worse into anybody who didn't rely heavily on their cooldowns like Soldier, Cass, Roadhog, D.Va, who could just spy check better than anyone else, Zenyatta. And if you notice, the list of the latter is kind of longer, so she had to be a little overtuned at times to find any meta relevance, like the time where she could build an EMP in 30 seconds. But heading into Overwatch 2, they fixed a lot of these problems, but she was not especially interesting. She really was just run away, shoot people from a distance until you could build EMP, then engage with EMP, which acted a lot like Gravitic Flux as it does now. Current version of Sombra is so much better than either of those two. Virus is a way more fun ability than anything Sombra's ever had before. Translocator being an Ender Pearl is so much more fun than her old Drop and Forgot. And Hack having the same utility that it ever has with ability lockout, but now increasing the damage of Virus not only with the initial burst being 50 damage where it usually would be 25, as well as the fact that it would do its 90 damage over 4 seconds instead over 2 seconds. This version of Sombra is just way more interesting, and the only real flaw I have with it is the fact that EMP lockout time is 3 seconds. What? The last one I want to go over, this is not going to take long because this is kind of outside the scope of this video, but I wanted to include a support anyways, and this was the closest it gets. Zenyatta. His abilities have not been significantly altered to a different identity necessarily, but I think he fits just barely into this group. See, in Overwatch 1, Harmony Orb and Discord Orb would last 3 seconds when out of line of sight, would travel at the same exact speed, or would heal for 30 healing per second, or have a 30% damage boost, respectively. It wasn't the most healthy design by any means, but one thing I have to give credit to the team for is the consistency there. But outside of that, he was very simple. He didn't have Snap Kick like he does today. Discord didn't have a cooldown on it after being worn off. You know, a current Zenyatta with Snap Kick having increased damage and knockback, and Discord Orb needing 7 seconds to be replaced on an individual, it's a way more healthy design. Granted, I do think that Snap Kick was a problem in the past, but I think honestly, the place that it's at now is kind of okay. It's not a better version of Lucio Boop on a quarter of the cooldown anymore. It's just kind of an okay dueling tool to get people off of you, which is how I think it was always intended to be. Not only that, but 5 seconds of Harmony Orb on a teammate is really nice, actually. So even though this isn't a significant rework, I still think it might just be the best one, or one of the best ones in Overwatch 2. It's only really competing with the likes of Pharah. But wait, there's actually one more that I just kind of missed out on. I just forgot that Brig got a rework to her ultimate, and Bash no longer stuns now, so I actually did have a support I could include this whole time. So, sorry Zen, I guess you're still here. Congrats. The Brig rework really only went into her ultimate, and in post, like since it's happened, I think that it does make her a lot more fun to play as, and a little bit more interesting to play against. It's not just an overhealth button, but at the same time, it was probably the most unnecessary of the reworks. Brig at the time of the reworked ultimate was genuinely fine. She was maybe even the best main support in the game at that moment, so the rework really was just a massive buff to her for very little reason. But at the same time, it did make her a little bit more vulnerable because she couldn't get overhealth for herself, I guess. But instead, she just got a ton of armor, so she's no more vulnerable than she ever has been. But outside of the fact that it is kind of unnecessary to have the reworked ultimate, it definitely makes the character way more fun, and in particular, I do think playing against her is more interesting than it is annoying nowadays, whereas Old Rally was just kind of a boring interaction. As well as the fact that I completely forgot about this part, Bash no longer stunning is incredible for the game's health. It was too easy to land, and it was too impactful to land. It was like 0.65 seconds or something like that. Way too strong for a stun. People complain about flashbang. This was the real problem child. Removing that and adding it to specifically the ult, I think is actually a really good idea. Brig is another really solid rework that I think they succeeded on. Hey, I'm at the end of the editing process now. If you watched and enjoyed the whole thing, I really appreciate it. I have a Discord now, so if you want to join that, it'll be in the description. Just because I feel like don't have anywhere to really put my stuff other than in other people's servers, and I feel weird doing that. But yeah, thank you if you watched the whole thing. I hope you enjoyed. I put a lot of effort into it. Have a great rest of your day.